The Supreme Court handed President Trump a significant defeat for his economic agenda today, ruling his use of emergency tariffs is illegal. In a 6-3 decision, the justices determined the president does not have the power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose taxes. The ruling strikes a stunning blow to the centerpiece of the president's economic agenda. It also marks the first major ruling by the High Court against the president's expanded use of power in office. He spoke about the ruling at a press conference a short time ago.
I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1.
Let's go ahead now and go to CBS News White House correspondent Willie James Inman, who joins us from the White House. So, Willie, I guess one of the big headlines, in addition to how unhappy the president was with this ruling and some of his scathing remarks against the justices, is what he is going to use instead to sort of skirt around this issue that he's not allowed to use IEPA, the Emergency Powers Act, to impose these levies.
Lindsay, the president calling this a ridiculous decision and blasting those Supreme Court justices who sided against his emergency powers that he used, IEPA, as you described it, those emergency powers for sweeping tariffs across the board, in large part against U.S. allies, in some cases foes. We know that the president, he certainly did not like this decision, jokingly referring to the State of the Union when you typically have all of the justices seated there on Capitol Hill, along with lawmakers saying essentially that they are barely invited to his State of the Union speech that is set to happen on Tuesday next week. Well, in terms of the president's announcement, he announced this 10% across the board tariff for 5 months on goods around the world, in large part to essentially go back to what he's been doing all along, to announce those sweeping tariffs that he says, in terms of those trade relations with other nations around the world, is unfair. He's simply he talked about the powers that he's going to use. Specifically, he's referring to Section 122 of the Trade Act, which calls for the president to powers that he can use to enact tariffs. In large part, those tariffs are limited, though, up to 15%, maximum of 150 days. So those two limits, 15%, 150 days. So the president likely going to be limited in terms of that potential power unless he gets the power to, of course, the input from Congress. Now, I do want to play some sound from the president when he talked about the tariffs and the situation that happened with the Supreme Court and his reaction there. Listen.
I don't think the court meant it, because the court doesn't show great spirit toward our country, in my opinion. A lot of bad decisions, but there are usually ways around it. This is something we could have done, as Justice Kavanaugh said, we could have done this originally, but we're doing it now. And the numbers could be far greater than the hundreds of billions we've already taken in.
And Lindsay, on top of that, the president talking about other authorities that he's going to use to call for more tariffs, specifically when it comes to Section 301 of the Trade Act, which in large part investigates certain unfair trade practices. There are already some Section 301 investigations into China's semiconductor industry, for instance, so that will certainly be coming down the road. But in large part, these 10% tariffs, the president saying that is going to be put into place in the next few days, Lindsay.
Okay, Willie James Inman, thank you. Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. And Jan, I think when you speak, we all listen. And this morning, when you said in the special report, this is one of the most consequential decisions in a modern presidency, I think I can speak for myself when I say I was floored by that analysis. What else can you tell us?
Well, and the reason that is because, as you'd said earlier, this is really kind of the core of President Trump's economic policies. And so the court is putting serious constraints on what he wants to do by saying that this federal statute does not authorize him to impose these sweeping, unlimited tariffs on pretty much every one of our trading partners worldwide. And as Willie said, he's going to now, as President Trump said, do it a different way. The problem with that is that the different way that he now has to follow, he doesn't like as much, because there's a cap on that, as Willie said. And so even though that cap is actually lower than what the average of what President Trump was doing under his previous attempt, he had that hammer, Lindsay, where he could threaten to do 25, 35, 40. That was a key negotiating thing for him, he believed. And then also, of course, it's limited, right? It's 5 months and not just endless. So that affects, again, kind of the hammer that he had to try to do some of these deals, trade deals with our partners. But sure, he's going to go ahead with this. As he said, there's other avenues. I thought what was also striking in this was just his tone and how he was actually lashing out at the Supreme Court, suggesting that they were under the influence of foreign interests. Two of those justices in the majority, of course, he nominated. And, you know, this is a court that just 2 years ago in 2024 voted 6-3 that presidents, including President Trump, could not be prosecuted for their official acts while in office. President Trump really liked that decision. And Democrats and liberals were bashing the court, calling the court illegitimate, in the pocket of Trump. And so I think what's interesting today is to see this is actually a Supreme Court, 9 justices, all with very different views, many of them on the law, struggling to reach the right answers as they see it, interpreting the Constitution, interpreting federal statutes. And they're not going to make everyone happy. And Trump, this may be in his first big loss this term, but it's not going to be his last. He's going to lose other cases this term, and he's also going to be very unhappy. He may win some, and then the liberals will be unhappy. But that's how our system works.
Called it embarrassing to their families. All right, Jan Crawford. Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. Katrina, one thing that the president mentioned in his remarks that we have also been talking about all day in our coverage is this issue of refunds. The justices didn't really lay out how this is going to go down.
That's right, Lindsay. And what the president said is that he mentioned that it's not discussed in the opinion and said that this will be tied up in court for 5 years. We know people have already been preparing for the potential of this opinion. They have been preparing their lawsuits, getting lawyers. But the only mention of refunds in the opinion was in the dissent that Justice Kavanaugh wrote. And he referenced this. He said the court did not lay out a plan here. Even during the arguments, Justice Amy Coney Barrett had said that it's going to be a mess figuring out these refunds. So they haven't laid out a roadmap, and the president is now saying this is just going to be tied up in litigation for years.
What did you make of all of the different concurrent and dissenting opinions in this? I think some, 170 pages in this decision?
Lindsay, I am still making my way through everything, but I think it shows even though there was unity here with 3 liberal and 3 conservative justices coming together, there were also differences in the reasoning. That's why we have so many different opinions here. So I think that that is very significant what each of them rely on and where they differ. For instance, Chief Justice John Roberts talked a lot about the major questions doctrine, which says that when it comes to matters of economic and political importance, Congress very clearly gives over that authority. And he relied on that a lot in his opinion. Justice Kagan, in her concurrence, said she didn't think that they needed to even go there, that this was just a strict textual analysis. When you look at the words of IEPA, you just cannot interpret it the way that the president wanted to. And then just to add and pick up on what Jan was saying, I think it was so striking, the language that he used when talking about the justices in this press conference. I mean, saying that they were swayed by foreign interest. He called them fools and lapdogs, unpatriotic and disloyal. These are justices, 2 of whom he nominated, who will also be deciding many more consequential opinions for the Trump administration. It was just very surprising to see him lash out at that level at the Supreme Court.
We're not used to hearing that language from a president in regards to the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you.